Welcome to Peninsula Symphony All-Stars at Home. Today we are just so happy to welcome Christopher Costanza, cellist of the St. Lawrence Quartet, Stanford faculty. Welcome, Chris. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too, Mitch. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Well, we're just delighted that this has worked out. And I understand you're just back from Charleston performing at the Spoleto Festival. This has been a crazy year, and it must have been nice to get back to playing live music in front of a live audience.
Absolutely true. It's kind of hard to put it into words, but I'll try and do it succinctly. I played well. So the Spoleto Festival is something that's really built into the fundamental being of that is the St. Lawrence String Quartet, because the quartet's been going there since 1995. I joined in '03, so this would have been my 18th summer going there, 18th season, but last year was canceled, of course. So, but in any case, we're basically celebrating more or less 25 years of the St. Lawrence Quartet being at the Spoleto Festival, and well, it's been over 30 years now since the quartet was formed. And in Charleston, the chamber music part of the festival consists of two concerts daily, usually at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. This year was 2 p.m. because they have to disinfect the hall in between concerts. And they're only allowing in about 25% of the house. So we were playing for audiences of maybe 120, 130 people, very enthusiastic ones. And another great thing about the festival is that the South Carolina Public Radio records all of the concerts. So and we get the other great thing is we get to play each program 3 times. So we get several shots at the repertoire, especially good for radio broadcasts. So in the course of the week that I was there, I did play 10 concerts. Actually 11. There was one additional. Now these aren't full 2-hour concerts. The program's generally roughly an hour, but still, it was really something to get back on stage and play for a living, breathing audience and feeling the energy from them. It's
right. That's music is not the same if we're just playing for ourselves. No matter how great the music and how wonderful the experience, it is about telling that story that Beethoven or Dvorak wrote to an audience.
Exactly true. Yeah,
and
totally agree.
That's fabulous. So, in the for the rest of the time in the last year, up until pretty recently, you've been making music at home,
yes,
which in your case is a joy. You have a violist sometimes at home and a violinist, your wife Deborah Fong, who's the concertmaster of Peninsula Symphony. Right. And I know that you have the two of you have, and three of you have made a lot of recordings over this time. I'm sure that's been wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's a real treat to play with family, string trio repertoire, while not nearly as big as the quartet repertoire, consists of some terrific pieces, and then the duo violin cello duo repertoire is even smaller, but still Deborah and I have enjoyed getting to know some of this repertoire a little bit better. I mean, and it brings us back to our days in school when we first played the Ravel Sonata, back in probably 1984.
Yeah, well, there's
or something like that.
Yeah, there's great repertoire, limited, but for violin and cello alone, there's Ravel, there's Martineau, there's
Kodály, of course.
Kodály, oh my God, they're fabulous, great.
Schulhoff, Erwin Schulhoff wrote a fantastic duo. Yeah.
So what we're going to do, you were generous enough, you and Deborah, to contribute some of those to the Peninsula Symphony's wonderful library of musical presentations at home, and let's listen to one of those right now. This is Deborah Fong and Christopher Costanza in the Glière Canzonetta for violin and cello. Nice brief introduction to music at home during the COVID era. So let's listen to that now. So that was Christopher Costanza and Deborah Fong playing the Glière Canzonetta. And it's a charming, lovely piece with a less of a profile in the literature than the Ravel and the Kodai and Martinu and so forth that we know. But it's lovely to have a chance to explore all of this literature. And I'm sure you and Deborah have really loved doing that.
Yeah, there of Glière, and speaking of this piece, there are 8 of these works. It's a collection of pieces of different characters. One of them is a gavotte. One of them he calls scherzo. This one, Canzonetta, is a berceuse. They're lovely character pieces, actually, and work well in a program of duo repertoire, especially if we're getting into pieces like Martinu and the Ravel or Kodai. I mean, they're really great to have ready to go, so to speak.
Yeah. Another focus I think that you have had over the last very strange 14 or 15 months has been Bach.
Yeah.
And isn't it amazing how we keep coming back to Bach?
Right.
There is something about the Bach pieces which continue to challenge violinists, violists, cellists, bass players.
Yes.
No matter how many hundreds of years we are away from these pieces, what keeps bringing you back to the Bach unaccompanied suites for cello?
Well, I mean, first of all, they've been part of my fiber as a cellist, so to speak, since, I was about 11 years old when I started playing at 8. When I was 11, I started taking lessons at the Eastman School on weekends, driving from Utica, New York, where I grew up. And I remember my first teacher at Eastman actually was Alan Harris, who just recently retired from Eastman. He had studied with Janos Starker, and Starker made quite a focus of Bach in his teaching and his playing. And so I remember that lesson when Alan Harris told my parents, buy this edition of the Bach cello suites and learn the prelude of the first suite. And I had no idea what these pieces were. But that stands out still in my memory to this day. So we ordered the music, or we picked it up at the music store, because you used to be able to do that sort of thing. And we went home, and I started playing, and I thought, well, this isn't so hard. Because the prelude of the first suite is mostly first position, getting sort of up to fourth position, but not that technically complex. And lots of open strings. But I said, okay, there must be something great to it. And my dad was thrilled, because he was a professional musician and a pianist, and said, oh, you get to play Bach suites now. This is remarkable. This is what you're going down this journey. You'll never get to the end of the road. And he was so right about that, because, of course, as I started to get to know the pieces, and especially as I got older, I realized, oh my goodness, this is like, I'm never really going to fully understand this stuff, and that's great, because I kind of don't want to. I kind of want to still have more to continue to discover. And recently, so back in about 2012 or so, I recorded all 6 of them up at the Banff Center and made a website to feature the recordings. It's still available on my current website. That was a labor of love. I enjoyed it immensely, just being there by myself, sitting in the middle of a recital hall playing this music and getting it recorded. But of course, as we teach it and play it, we rediscover. And lately, I've been fascinated by going back to the Anna Magdalena Bach manuscript. Mm-hmm. Of course, as you know, there's no manuscript in J.S. Bach's own hand that survived. So the Anna Magdalena tends to be the most reliable, at least we think, of the. I think that there are 4 extant manuscripts, none in Bach's own hand. And the great cellist Honor Bilsma wrote a book about the Anna Magdalena manuscript called Bach the Fencing Master. So I bought this book, and he very strictly interprets in this book the Anna Magdalena in terms of bowings, and always back and forth with the bow, never hooking anything, following it to the letter of the law, so to speak. And I've never really, I confess to never having examined it as closely perhaps as I should. So I don't think I'm going to follow it quite like Honor Bilsma did. But I'm curious to make some changes in my own sort of articulation approach to the pieces. Not necessarily quite reflected yet in what I'm doing with them, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And so that's another new chapter perhaps I can explore as we go forward.
Yeah, and here we are decades later. Bach has not lost any of its mystery and its magic. And what we're going to play now is the opposite end, in a way, of that Bach G major Suite number 1. This is the suite number 6. And we are dealing here with something that is technically very demanding.
Yes.
Even 300 years later is just at the upper reaches of what's possible on the cello.
All right.
And such glorious, gorgeous music.
It's really something. I meant to mention that, of course, it was written for a 5-stringed instrument. So basically a cello with an added E string. And of course, most of us don't have one of those. So we have to play up high a lot of the time.
Yes, Laszlo Varga had a lovely 5-string cello in which he played these pieces, and it's a heck of a lot easier.
Yes. Right.
But anyway, on the cello, this is just glorious music. Let's listen now to the 6th suite, the prelude of the 6th suite of Bach that Chris Costanza recorded just, I think it was last September.
It was September for the Gold Coast Chamber Players series in Lafayette, California. It was a live stream from a restaurant in Lafayette.
Very good. Let's listen to that now. Here we go. So that was a gorgeous performance of the Prelude to the Sixth Suite of Bach, played by Christopher Costanza. And it's just music of incredible depth and complexity, so many lines being sustained at any given point, so many voices heard opposite each other. I assume that this is still a core of the teaching that you do with your students.
Absolutely true. I mean, all 6 of the suites. At any given time, basically all of my students will be working on some movement or collection of movements of Bach. In fact, I have a student who's graduating from Stanford next week, and that's sort of how we're ending our time together, re-examining some of the movements that we had worked on together in the past. So it remains that way, will always be that way. And there's so, again, as I was saying earlier, there's so much to discover in it. I was talking about bowings, but then you just mentioned the depth of the voices. And so often he doesn't write chordally. Now in the sixth suite, in the slower movements, you will hear more chord writing. And of course, in the violin sonatas and partitas, you hear more use of chords than you do in the cello suites. Except that they're incredibly rich harmonically. So you might think, well, if there's only one line going on, where's the harmony? But it's implied constantly. And so one of the things we look for is what notes are missing, or what notes might he be hinting at that may even be in there hiding in a line that we can point out to show the harmonic structure of the piece, because it fundamentally we're dealing here with harmony and counterpoint, and yet much of the time we're playing a single line.
So on one instrument, yeah,
on one
remarkable.
Instrument, right.
So, how has your teaching been this last year? Are you using Zoom? Are you in person ever? What's it been like over the course of the last 14 months?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I think my students have gotten more lessons and more regular lessons than ever in the past, because my usual life involves quite a lot of touring. And we were talking about Charleston earlier. That was only the second trip I've made to play in over 14 months. Whereas normally, some part of every month, I'm off doing some sort of tour, whether it be a big one or a little one. And so the teaching has been almost entirely remote, starting in March of 2020. And we went to Zoom. Some students prefer to use, in some way, sometimes I do too, prefer to use FaceTime, which is similar in a sense. But Zoom has improved in terms of sound quality. The company has made some improvements to it, but it pales in comparison to being in the same room with a student. But we've made it work. I had a sort of interesting phenomenon. As of this quarter at Stanford, I can teach some of my students in person if they're in residence on campus and they're approved to come into the building, and not in this. I'm right now in my teaching studio at Stanford, but we can't meet in this room with students because it's too small technically. So in a classroom we can meet. And I remember my first experience teaching a live lesson in about a year. I couldn't believe the sound. It was just, I was almost in tears because it was so real, because it was real. It was all happening in the room.
Yeah.
And then I adjusted to the phenomenon after a few more lessons of teaching people. But I have been able to teach 3 of my students live over the past couple of months, and that's just
wonderful.
Tremendous.
Yeah, that's just wonderful. I do think that for all of the curses of the last year plus, a lot of the most focused and dedicated music students have invested themselves in practice and study and internalizing what can be learned through their teachers and on their own. And all of the competitions and audition processes that I've been through over the last few months seem to signify to me that the kids who are really dedicated have made huge progress this year.
Right.
Maybe even more than in a typical year. And
right.
So there are some small rewards out of all of this.
I could say I've noticed that from my Stanford students, where they've had fewer distractions and therefore more regular time to practice, because Stanford can be a pretty distracting environment for a cellist if one is also studying human biology or physics or some sort of engineering. So one in particular I'm thinking of, who lives in Irvine, and her mom is an excellent pianist, and so they've been learning duo repertoire all year, which is great. We've had Beethoven C major sonata, we've had Schumann Adagio and Allegro, and did the whole Schumann concerto together. They're doing Franck sonata now. It's terrific to have that experience, albeit on a FaceTime call each time.
Right. But an experience that you've had with Deborah at home in a way. You're lucky when you have another musician that you're not isolated from.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah,
and that's
I
been
agree completely.
terrific. We're going to talk a lot about the St. Lawrence Quartet and ensemble playing, and particularly string quartet ensemble playing. But one of the aspects of your career has been to perform chamber music with groups that don't play together all the time. And we're going to listen in a moment to the performance of the Dvorak Dumki Trio with some familiar people, you and Joyce Yang, who's been on this program and played with Peninsula Symphony, as have you, and Augustin Hadelich. Wonderful performance of the last movement of the Dvorak Dumki Trio. But what's it like for you to create a new ensemble with people that you don't play with every day in great literature? You probably arrived at a festival or a performance of some kind, and you have to get to know each other musically in a short period of time. How did you prepare this piece, and what's that like to create an ensemble on the spot?
Right. Well, this situation was quite typical, actually. We had something like maybe 2 days to learn this. And we also played a Beethoven trio. I believe it was Opus 1, number 2 on that program.
One of the great Opus 1s of all time.
Pieces, I can't get enough of them. And I love the piano and trio literature so very much. When I was in school, I hardly ever played quartets. I played mostly piano trios, actually. And truthfully, before I was in a professional quartet, and I've been in a couple of them now, much of my career was doing exactly this, getting together with people for a very short amount of time, just a few days. I used to, for example, go for a long time we lived in Virginia Beach. Deborah was principal second of the orchestra there, in Norfolk. And I would drive up to New York and play. There's a series called Barge Music in New York, and I would play there at certain times 1 week out of every month.
Right.
And we would rehearse sometimes starting Monday, but not often until Tuesday, and the first concert was Thursday. So sometimes we would learn gigantic programs for those.
Yeah, run by Olga, who was an old friend of all of ours. That's a great series, the Olga Bloom series, Under the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, and at the time, the artistic director was a great violinist who sadly passed away far too young, Ikwon Bae, Korean violinist. And we had so much fun. I played with all sorts of folks there, and it really was sort of, it felt like normal practice to me to say, okay, I better know my part pretty well because we're going to learn this thing fast. Yeah. But to get in the groove and to get in the mindset of these people coming together really for such a short period of time, and often people you'd never played with before. But then the more times you do it, well, you get together with friends again, on different repertoire, and you still only have 2 days to learn the piece. But you start to know people better, like, well, for example, Ikwon or pianist Chris O'Reilly or various other people who I played with quite a lot at the Barge. It felt like a family at a certain point, and I think that's kind of the mindset generally. That we're all a big chamber music family anyway, all of us worldwide who play chamber music, and it's just which member of the family will we be playing with this week,
And I'm sure you all three know this piece inside and out, and yes. I don't know Augustin particularly well, but Joyce is just the most joyful chamber music colleague that you could possibly have. Yeah. So I'm sure this came together in a very comfortable and happy way. Let's watch and listen to that now. This is the Dvorak Dumki Trio, played by Augustin Hadelich, Christopher Costanza, and Joyce Yang. So that was the last movement of the Dvorak Dumki Trio, performed by Augustin Hadlick. Christopher Costanza and Joyce Yang, familiar to Peninsula Symphony audiences from her performance of Rachmaninoff and on this very series, and just a joyous collaboration and a wonderful performance of the Dvorak. I love that trio, and I love that movement. It's just great music. But somehow or another, you also need to manage, if you're going to be the most well-rounded cellist, the chops and the familiarity with repertoire to be a soloist. Christopher Costanza was soloist with Peninsula Symphony a little over a year ago, along with Deborah, at the Bing Concert Hall, and a beautiful performance of Kol Nidre. And we're going to hear a performance of the Prokofiev, just the last little bit of the Prokofiev Symphony Concertante, because if we did the whole thing, that would be the entire program here. Right. Tell us about preparing this performance of this monstrous piece of music that was considered unplayable for a long period of time, written for Rostropovich.
Well, this performance, thus far, is the only performance I've ever been able to give of the piece, because it's become much more mainstream now. I mean, I hear a lot of high school students playing it incredibly well. When I was in high school, I didn't know it existed. So I studied it with one of my teachers at New England Conservatory, Larry Lesser, who knew it extremely well, had studied it with Piatigorsky at USC back in the day. But I just studied it with him sort of towards the end of my time at the conservatory. And I used to play concertos pretty frequently. I won Young Concert Artist in 1986. Boy, that was a long time ago. But the prize of winning Young Concert Artist is to have professional management, and so I would do concertos frequently. But that piece never came up. There were a lot of Dvoraks, a lot of Saint-Saëns, a lot of Haydn concertos, Rococos, that sort of thing, Shostakovich even, but never the Prokofiev. So this was, I think we did this in about 2015 or so. It's been a few years now. But the Stanford every summer puts together an orchestra called the Stanford Summer Symphony. And the conductor that year was our interim director, Anna Wittstruck, who had been my cello student here for 5 or 6 years. And she now teaches at the University of Puget Sound, conducts up there and teaches musicology classes. And so she said, "Hey, I want you to come and do a concerto. What would you like to play?" And I remember telling her, well, I would either like to do the Korngold Concerto, which is opposite end of the spectrum in terms of length. It's only about 13 minutes long, or Prokofiev Symphonia Concertante. And she goes, "Let's do the Prokofiev." And so I said, okay, now I have to really learn the thing. Because, I mean, I hadn't really learned it inside out from my time of studying it back in the late 80s. So it was time for me to really get to the practice room and figure the thing out. So I did, and I was thrilled beyond belief to have the opportunity to do it, and I enjoyed it immensely. Bing Hall is very rewarding for this kind of thing, for orchestral repertoire, for concerto repertoire, more so even than I think for chamber music, in terms of the way the sound works in that space. Yeah. So I couldn't have been happier to have this opportunity. And I left the performance thinking I want to do it again, and so I'm awaiting another opportunity someday. But in any case, this was a great experience for me.
Well, that will be very much in mind then. Yes, so let's hear just the last part of the Allegro Marcato of the performance that Christopher Costanza did with Anna Wittstruck. Summer Symphony at Stanford in 2015 of Prokofiev Symphonia Concertante. Let's listen. So that was Christopher Costanza, brilliant soloist, with the Stanford Summer Symphony conducted by Anna Whitstruck in the Prokofiev Symphonia Concertante, this monstrosity of a fabulous, brilliant, thrilling piece of music, but it's a tough one to lasso.
It sure is. You think how could that even work? I mean, the way it's constructed, and it just somehow does.
Yeah, and with these monumental forces also to bring it off. Anyhow, a marvelous performance.
Thank you.
And we need to come back finally home, which for Christopher Costanza is St. Lawrence String Quartet. Right. The quartet has been able to get together and do some playing over the last year, and now really pretty fully back together again, doing things like, as we come full cycle here, to the Spoleto Festival that you just did. But we're going to listen to some Debussy, the Debussy String Quartet. When was this recorded? And this was recorded at the big concert hall with masks, so I know it's in the last, 10 months or so.
It was probably in, I want to say early May. So it was quite recent.
Very recently, yeah.
We've been so when the pandemic struck hard in March of 2020. 2020. Jeez, I can't remember the year anymore. We got back from our tour on March 13th of 2020. I remember that date. It's one of those things that sticks in your head. And then we didn't play together until August. But what got us back together is that Stanford Live was doing some video programs. And so we were able to go back into Bing Hall. They had a full professional video team and a producer and the whole, they even had a documentary film maker do a mini documentary about us getting back together. And we recorded that back in August. And then since then, we've been gathering in, Jeff Nuttall, our first violinist, has a basement that works well for rehearsals. So he lives in Portola Valley. We go up there, we rehearse. And we've been fully masked until recently when the CDC said, okay, if you're all vaccinated, take them off. So we did. But we made videos from that basement space. We've made Haydn Quartet sort of discovery shows where we break down a Haydn Quartet. We've shared many of these videos with concert presenters around the country. And then we've also had the opportunity to record some performances up at the Noe Ministry in Noe Valley in San Francisco. And then we had these opportunities to record in Bing Hall as well, relatively recently, where we recorded, I know we did some Haydn Opus 76, I can't remember which one we did, maybe number one? No, maybe it wasn't number one, but we recently recorded all of them, is the reason I'm confused, just for video, and we're going to make an actual recording of the 76s. But anyhow, we did some Haydn, and we did Debussy, and I think we did one other piece too, I'm forgetting right now, maybe a Beethoven.
And it must have, through all of this time, it must have felt so good to be able to get back with your primary musical family, the St. Lawrence Quartet, and get into the meat of the repertoire like this.
Oh, yeah. And Debussy Quartet, of course, is a favorite of all of ours, I think.
Certainly a favorite of mine. Just a great piece.
Grew up listening to it on LP, where of course the other side of the record, predictably, was the Ravel Quartet.
Ravel Quartet, of course. And they are so interestingly similar and different.
Different, right.
So
Yeah, no, it was just so exciting to delve back into this piece and to be able to make this recording. You'll see us. I believe we're fully masked in this recording because
Right.
Stanford required it, but it's from Bing Hall.
So we will always be able to look at this and place it in time
That's right.
with the masks in beautiful Bing Concert Hall. The St. Lawrence String Quartet playing the first movement of the Debussy String Quartet. Let's listen. So that was the St. Lawrence String Quartet, including cellist Christopher Costanza, our guest at Peninsula Symphony All-Stars at Home today. A gorgeous, thrilling performance of that great movement of Debussy. Thank you for being with us, taking us a little bit on your journey of the last year and the last years. It's great to see you, Chris, and we'll look forward to making music and having wine and dinner together and so forth sometime as soon as possible.
Very soon. I'm excited to do that. It's great to speak with you, Mitch. It's a great pleasure for me.
So thank you to Chris. Thank you to our audience. We'll see you again soon on Peninsula Symphony All-Stars at Home. Good evening, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Want more content like this from Peninsula Symphony? Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the red subscribe button below and tap the alarm bell icon to get notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Thanks for watching.